Okay, mics are on, things are working. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement and say, in the spirit of respect, authenticity, and reconciliation, the town of Slave Lake honors and acknowledges that we are situated on the traditional lands of Sawridge First Nation within Treaty 8 territory, home to Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit peoples who have occupied these lands since time immemorial. We have an agenda in front of us. We're removing minutes of the previous meeting. Any other changes to the agenda? If not, Councillor Ferguson.
Motion to adopt the agenda as amended.
Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? That is carried. We'll jump right into question period then. Boss, you got anything you want to add?
Nothing prepared. No.
It says no. Okay. Any questions from council? I just had one concern that came across my desk here late this evening. I emailed all you guys and sent it off to administration. It was a request for us to consider, came from one of the schools, parent councils, about some frustration with crosswalks at the four-way stop over by Speedies on 6th Ave, Northeast, Northwest, and Main Street. There's a lot of traffic, and it's been brought to their attention that there's been some close misses, and would like this administration to look at possibly putting lights and stuff there. So I know we have some costs associated with that, and I replied that we would look at it during budget. The other thing is I know that another group of parents had reached out to us previously about frustrations with traffic flow over on 7th Street Southeast coming out of Roland Michener out of the high school there. And some traffic turning. I actually saw a town truck sitting over there, so they must be collecting some data time and some stuff and figuring some things out. So I look forward to some feedback on that when they come up with some recommendations. Also, the word on the street is the community Christmas tree has got a bigger wow factor than when we started. So my understanding is that administration decided that it needed to look a little bit more spectacular, and we spent some more money out there. The guys went out and did a good job, and so we appreciate them doing that, and the community thanks you. As I see nothing else, I'll jump into the rest of the agenda. So we've got automatic traffic enforcement on page 9 in our package. And Gary, I understand you're doing that.
Yeah. So good evening, your worship and council. As you are aware, the town of Slave Lake has been providing or has been doing automated traffic enforcement since 2017. Current contract goes until next June, so June of 2023. About a year ago, Alberta Justice and Solicitor General came up with some new guidelines. And initially, those guidelines, there were some pieces that weren't exactly fully fleshed out in terms of how the impact would be and to the town of Slave Lake. I've summarized the guidelines for you in the report. A couple of the bigger, more important pieces is that we've had to go through all our locations and reassess whether or not they meet the provincial criteria or not. There's much more emphasis based on statistics, on collision data, speeding data, and really trying to make it more of a data-based decision-making type of model geared towards traffic safety than just saying, it looks like a good spot for photo radar, we should implement it at that location. A lot of the requirements that were put in place, the town was already doing, working with our contractor, Global Traffic Group, who have adopted a decent standard in terms of some of these pieces already. They were already doing a lot of these pieces. So it wasn't a major implementation or major change in regrouping to meet the new requirements. Like I said, the largest impact has really been going through all the site assessments and making sure they meet all the provincial justification, which ours, the vast majority of our sites do. First off, school and playground zones are automatically adopted. And then looking at the other locations, we looked at collision data, speeding data, and so on to make sure that they met the requirements. The other thing that Global Traffic Group does, working with the town of Slave Lake, we have all our sites listed on our town website, but on the town's website is a link to an interactive map that you can actually go into. You can pull up it has all the sites displayed. If you click on it, you could actually open up the justification sheet that the detachment commander has signed off saying why there's full speed enforcement or intersection enforcement at that location. And it will also provide supporting data. So if there is a frequency of speeding, or it's a proof that speed has declined since the start of using photo enforcement at that location. Those are two examples of where we could use photo enforcement under the provincial regulations, and the data to support it should be attached to it. I haven't checked every site, but the ones that I did check, it was all attached and there. So we're very transparent to the public. The other thing is that was required by the provincial regulations, and I actually saw that Global Traffic Group is doing that already, is marking their vehicle. In the past, they've used unmarked plain Ford pickup trucks, and now you'll see that they have a kind of a green neon sign, that's a magnetic sign on the trucks that say, I think it says, drive safe. Yeah. There's about 3 different wording that they're allowed to use under the provincial regulations. This is following Edmonton's example. Of course, Edmonton has their trucks totally wrapped in the lime green coloring, but they park up on the overpass and target vehicles down below, so the drivers don't really see it. In our particular case, the Global Traffic Group had gotten approval just to use the markings that they are getting, and it was approved by the Solicitor General's Department. Ultimately, of course, photo enforcement is a tool that supplements our conventional enforcement, trying to help deal with any speed violations, but also address any hopefully there's a connection to collisions and going forward in the future. It's really the reason why we're doing this. In terms of moving forward in the future, the other thing I didn't mention is that the Solicitor General's Department has promised a more robust audit process to make sure municipalities are following the rules. We were audited around 2017, I believe. Our peace officers were audited again in 2019. Now that's looking at more of the rest of the program, not just photo enforcement. But at that time, they did touch on photo enforcement and had no concerns of either of those audits. But they're promising that they will be checking to make sure municipalities are following the requirements. The other indication, or the other issue that keeps coming up from time to time, is how fine revenue from photo enforcement can be used. The province in the past has commented that they want it used for traffic safety initiatives. But at this time, there have been no changes to the guidelines in and around how fine revenue can be used. So we have our own internal, I'm not sure if it's a policy, but we have our own internal restriction around our photo or radar reserve that we've been using it primarily for park improvements and traffic safety initiatives. So ours isn't going into general revenue. But there is, in the past, as concern has been raised in other municipalities that just use it as general revenue. So that's what the province has talked about introducing, but they have not introduced any kind of limitations on that. So I wanted to make council aware of the changes that are happening to this. Like I said, we did go through with myself, working with Global Traffic, and the RCMP went through all our sites, reassessed all our sites just recently before the beginning of the month, so that we were able to make sure that we're in complete compliance with the new guidelines. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions, comments from council? Councillor Adams.
Quick question on how I understand there has to be an assessment done and there's a process for that. If we change something in the bylaw, like a speed limit, does that trigger an automatic reassessment of all this ATE stuff?
Not specifically for photo enforcement, but we have to make sure any changes to the bylaw, how it ties into photo enforcement, that it's still meeting the guidelines. So example, if we change the speed limit at a particular location, we would have to then do a review of that to see if photo enforcement can be used at that area or not. Conventional enforcement still can be used anywhere, right?
So if we, for example, drop the speed limit across town, we'd no longer be able to use ATA except in high-risk areas like a school zone.
That's correct. That's primarily the where we can use it right now, is more more higher risk areas and areas where the speed limit is more than 50 kilometers an hour.
Thanks.
Councillor Gramlich.
Gary, the part on prohibit photo radar on residential streets with speeds less than 50 kilometers. Last year, this was coming up, it was grandfathered in. Remember, like if it was already being used on Caribou Trail, for example, they could keep it there. Is this saying they have to remove that now?
Speeds less than 50 kilometers an hour. So where Caribou Trail speed limit is 50 kilometers an hour, we can still use it at that
Sorry,
location.
I read
Yeah.
that wrong.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But let's say the speed limit were to be changed on a particular road
Then it's
down to 40, then we would have to reassess it.
And right now, we're currently, reports coming back there, where we're potentially looking at that.
Sorry?
Yeah, in regards to speed limits within the town, yeah, that'll be at a future council day.
Right. Councillor Brandel.
Gary, at one time a while ago, they had mentioned that they were gonna start doing distracted driving on photo radar. Whatever happened to that?
It's a legislative amendment that was supposed to be brought forward, and I don't think it ever cleared the legislature.
Okay, any other questions, comments? If not, Councillor Hughes,
I move that council accept this report as information.
any further discussion? All the question was in favor? It's carried. Interim operating budget. Roland's not here.
That's me. Good evening. So the purpose of this report is to authorize an interim operating budget for 2023, which would provide sufficient appropriations for the operating expenditures for the 2023-2024 operating budget. Section 242 sub 1 of the Municipal Government Act provides that council must adopt an operating budget for each calendar year. Where council has not yet adopted an operating budget for the year, clause 2 provides that council may adopt an interim operating budget for a part of a calendar year. Without budget approvals in place, expenditures for personnel, services, and goods could not be made. The 2023-24 operating budget is in ongoing deliberations. Council is asked to authorize an interim budget to cover operating expenditures anticipated for the 2023 year. The appropriations identified in the attached tables are reflective of the spending levels, assumptions, and personnel costs identified in the most recent draft of the 2023 operating budget. Yeah, and then there's just the report for your information.
Okay. Discussion from council. Councillor Adams.
I'm just wondering what kind of timeline is normally associated with the interim operating budget? Is it 1 quarter? I see it's about roughly for a third as far as numbers go, but I don't know if that weighs into 1/3 of the year.
Yeah, I think it's obvious it's meant to cover 3 to 4 months ish. I mean, if there's, for whatever reason, if our operating budget still hasn't passed by, or as we're getting close to the expiration of this order, our administration would come back with a second interim request if the original operating budget hasn't been done. But this usually buys us 3 or 4 months worth of business.
Other questions, comments? So as we know, budget is ongoing at the moment. Council is getting close to being complete. That will wrap up with the last of our budget meetings in January, in which point the budget would come to us likely in February there for passing. But at this point, we would need funds to continue with operations in January and February and make sure everybody gets paid. Councillor Brandel.
I'll make a motion that I move the council approves the 2023 interim operating budget as presented.
Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? That is carried. Correspondence, we have a funding request from the Curling Association. So we've helped them out with funds in the past. And they are once again looking for funds in the amount of $15,000. I know last year, I think we gave them 10. And so that is a consideration amongst many others that council is considering during the budget process. So we have not forgotten about that, but we appreciate it when they do give us a heads up that they're still requiring it. So that's just there for a note. Mayor's Corner. Council's obviously been busy with some budget meetings there behind the scenes, and there's this balance that continues to be the war that gets waged in here behind the doors is how do we find that balance between what we feel that residents are asking for, what level of service that they're looking for, and what can be afforded. And you know, whether it's this business or our own businesses or any community that you're working in or going to the grocery store or going to the gas pump, inflation is biting back. And there's talk that it will start to go down, and that's why they keep raising interest rates, and that's how economics is supposed to work. Although most of us, when we go to the grocery store, are not seeing it yet. So, you know, council has a big, tough job. They're trying to figure out where that balance is. There's no doubt in my mind that it's going to be impossible without dramatic service level cuts that we would see a 0% increase. But when inflation is anywhere between 6 and 9%, that's an alarming number as well. So it'll be interesting to see where we end up. I got an intermunicipal meeting coming up next week, which will be a bigger one as we talk. One of the big topics is going to be about land and development and industrial land. We're feeling the pinch of that as industry continues to be busy in our area and doesn't seem to be receding, and yet we have no areas for them to develop in. So it's something that's passionate both the town of Slave Lake and the MD. We had a legacy meeting last night too, which was a good update to see that things are progressing. And now with COVID, COVID's not over, but we're in recovery, and basically we're booking events again and things are happening, and our revenues actually for 2022 don't look too bad at all. The other big thing is we're trying to get our space rented over there. As you will recall that the daycare condensed their space, and so we've been advertising, and so we have a couple of different options, and we're exploring that right now, and hope to get a tenant in there sooner rather than later, which will help the funding of the deficit that exists there. The big one is you know an update for council that's going to get you thinking here. As well as for our residents. We had a landfill meeting this afternoon for 3 or 4 hours, and there's a variety of concerns there. So over the last number of years, it has been difficult with the landfill, as one of our biggest things was that GFL a number of years ago basically started trucking a bunch of our volume away from the community, which helps that your cell doesn't, your pit doesn't fill up as faster and offset some of those revenue or offset some of those expenses, but then also hits you in the revenue channel. And so we've been working hard to try and balance that out. It's required requisition from the town and the MD. And it's been a roller coaster volume that's been coming in. And so it's very difficult when you have this budget there to plan ahead when your revenues are all up and down. What we are noticing is that our current requisition that comes from the town and the MD to offset the deficit is likely not enough unless we change our service levels and our operations over there. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is we got an engineering report that essentially there's some good news and bad news. So right now, basically we have this pit that we've dug out way back in the day when we started the landfill up there. In 2011 there, we added a new cell there and dug another pit because we had a whole bunch of debris that came in after the fire. And then essentially instead of building one big giant hole when you start out with and then have to manage all the problems that comes with that, you dig the hole in little sections. And so that you're only ever managing a smaller piece is the easiest way to describe it. But then as we fill up those other spots, we actually have to deal with some of the post-closure that comes with that. So ideally, we've got some advantages over the last number of years that we've been able to keep going a bit higher on our face there and using height to delay us putting in a new cell. Right now, the current cell is debentured until 2025. So the ideal scenario is that we have to get beyond 2025 before we put the new cell in. So we're not dealing with 2 debentures all at once, because believe it or not, to add a new cell to dig another pit is approximately $1 million. That being said, what was highlighted in the engineering report that we've never really dealt with in the past is that there's some extensive work that has to be done to cover and close the hill behind us as we're doing the new one. And so this was not brought to light by administration in the past, but it's another $1.16 million that we've got to figure out how to deal with. And so it's, still early days and still lots to figure out there, but garbage continues to cost us more money. And so then, when you're dealing with these ebbs and flows of revenue, we're also seeing that our expenses, just like everybody else's expenses, are going up underneath us, but revenue is not keeping pace with that. So, one of the questions is going to be is this the operation that we should continue with over the next 2 to 5 to 10 years? Or should we look at something totally different, what our options are? And so we did task administration there that we're actually going to do an RFP, RFQ type thing to go out and get a consultant there to maybe outline some options and say, here's something else that you could do. Maybe you guys want to get into the business garbage. Maybe you want to get out of the business of garbage. Maybe you want to maintain the landfill. Maybe you want to be a transfer station. All different things to consider. And so we're going to dig into that one and make the best choice there, but we need some information to be able to do that. So just want to throw it on the radar now that it is a potential area of liability for the town from a fiscal point of view and will affect rates likely in the future. Other than that, I have nothing else to add. Councillor Adams.
Motion to go into closed.
Motion to go in closed session. Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor?